Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
Associate practice is one of the most popular routes of entry into private practice among dental graduates. Here to offer us an owner's perspective of associate practice is Dr. William Love, who has been involved in this type of activity for nearly 10 years. Dr. Love, just what is an associate practice?
Associate practice, very simply stated, is simply that practice where a dentist is employed by another dentist or a group of dentists who own the practice.
How do you feel about those arrangements?
Well, I think they have some distinct advantages for both the associate and the owner dentist.
What are some of the advantages to the young graduate coming in as an associate?
Well, it gives them an opportunity to have income quickly. Usually a graduate, as you know, is in debt, oftentimes has a family to support. And so it gives them an opportunity to make a living almost from the very start. But more important than that, I think it gives the young dentist the chance to gain experience and to learn because he has instant consultation from a more experienced man. Other things that are of advantage, I think, to the associate, he may not be sure that he wants to go into general practice, and so this gives him an opportunity to try it out for a while. He may want, after a year in general practice, he might decide he wants to be a specialist, perhaps. Or he may not be sure of the location of the practice, and he's not sure whether he wants to live there the rest of his life. He may have down the road plans to buy a part of that practice, and yet he's not quite sure of whether or not the philosophy of this practice is his philosophy. Those are the sorts of things.
And these decisions can be made with minimal financial commitment, is that right?
Sure, he's in a spot where, well, usually he will sign up for a year, perhaps, and then he can leave if he wishes, and he hasn't really committed himself to anything. He can get out while the getting's good if he wishes to.
What about the owner and the advantages to the owner?
Well, the owners who are interested in associates are usually dentists who are very busy, often harried by their practices, and if they can have an associate, it helps them to relieve their own practice load. It gives them the opportunity, too, to take a vacation and not be worried about whether their patients are being properly cared for. Because with the associate there, their patients can be cared for in their own office with the records and the x-rays. The histories are there. Gives them an opportunity to do postgraduate work that perhaps they couldn't have done before because they felt tied down all the time. These are the sorts of things. I think it's important for the owner dentist to have a younger man present. I think it's stimulating to have a young graduate in your office. It's fun. It's fun to teach, and it's fun to get the ideas of a man right out of practice or right out of school.
Is there a financial advantage to the owner?
Oh, yes, I'm sure there is. In most cases, I think the owner should realize some financial gain for the time that he's taking to bring this young man along.
What should the recent graduate look for in terms of characteristics of a private practice when he's looking for an associate agreement?
Well, aside from where the practice is, I think much more important than that is to try to determine what the philosophy of that practice is. Is it a practice that emphasizes prevention? Do they have a good recall system? Do they teach oral hygiene procedures to their patients? These things are important. Also, if you're thinking about associating with a practice that has one owner and a number of associates, the practice will reflect the philosophy and the character of the owner. And it's important to try to get a little handle on what that philosophy and character is. Aside from that, the fellow looking at a practice from the point of view of associating should take a look at the overall office makeup. Is it clean? Is the equipment up to date and in good repair? What's the attitude of the employees? What's their personal appearance? The other dentist or dentists working there, do they look professional? And do they have professional attitudes? These things are all important.
What about facilities in terms of equipment that's available for the associate to use?
Well, I think that it's important that the associate have at least one operatory, and which he can call his own, where he can place his instruments and arrange things the way he would like to have them arranged. He might find himself in a situation where he's with a dentist who is not practicing four-handed dentistry. And young men coming out of school nowadays, that's the norm. And so he needs to have a situation that he can adapt to readily, so that the environment is no detriment to his learning and doing well.
On the other side of the coin, what should the owner look for in a recent graduate?
Well, I can tell you what I look for. I look at the personal appearance of that individual first. And then I try in conversations with a prospective associate to find out what his philosophy of practice is, and I try to determine if it's the same as mine.
How do you do that? By interview?
By interview. Not just one interview, but a number of interviews. Oftentimes in a casual atmosphere, over lunch, over dinner. Trying to get that prospective associate in as relaxed environment as possible, so that so I can begin to get a feeling for what this guy really is all about. And of course, I check with the school where he went to school. I like to find out what kind of a record he had and what his professors think of him. Of course, personality is very important. Associates frequently are not very confident about their ability to practice dentistry, but it's nice if they can cover that up and can appear to their patients as though they're confident. And whether or not they have a feeling that they want to learn. I find recent graduates are often fellows that think they know everything, and those of us who have been experienced for a long time know that they know very little, and it's awfully hard to teach somebody who thinks he knows everything.
So compatibility is a real issue with you?
Oh, of course. If you're going to be working with that individual within a very confined space for many hours every week, and if you're not compatible, it simply won't work.
How do you feel about written agreements between the owner dentist and the associate dentist?
Well, I think the associate should insist on that. From the associate's point of view, it can lead to a much more harmonious year for him in that practice. And it has advantages for the owner, too. I don't think the document needs to be a fancy legal thing. I don't think it needs to be notarized and witnessed. If the two individuals don't get together or don't get along well together, it makes no difference what sort of a legal document you have. It simply isn't going to work, and the associate will leave. But it should be something that delineates as completely as possible all those possible areas of conflict that could come up.
It's just a guideline to avoid future misunderstanding. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly. And if those things are not in writing, people often forget what they said or what they agreed to in conversation.
What are some specific elements that should be included in such an agreement?
Well, Joe, I made some notes about that. It's important that there be a duration to this agreement. I would suggest that at least 1 year. And then some notation as to what happens at the end of that 1 year. Is the associate going to be offered another year of association if both agree that's desirable, or will there be an opportunity to buy part of the practice or become a partner, or in a corporate practice buy shares or whatever? It should point out what the working hours of the associate will be. When does he start in the morning, and does he have to work Saturdays, and can, if he wishes, work evenings, or is that something that's required of him? It should say whether the owner dentist is going to pay any vacation pay, or whether the associate will be paid for a certain number of sick days per year, or have paid holidays. Such things as who pays Blue Cross, who pays malpractice insurance, is there major medical insurance involved, or life insurance involved? I think the associate, he or she, should look at the agreement to find if there is any territorial clause not to compete, a so-called covenant not to compete. I think this should not be in any agreement between an associate dentist and an owner dentist. This is simply a means which might be employed by the owner dentist to prevent the associate from practicing within a 5-mile area should the associate leave the practice. And incidentally, those covenants are not legal if they don't carry some monetary, some money payment if the associate, when he or she leaves the practice, does not practice within 5 miles, then there should be some payment to the associate for agreeing to that covenant and going by its restrictions. Such things as who owns the charts and the radiographs of the patients that the associate has treated during that year. In my view, those should go with the patient, and it should be the patient's choice as to who they see in the future. What facilities will the associate have? Will he or she have their own operatory? Will he or she have their own dental auxiliaries to work with? There should be some mention that the owner dentist agrees to announce to the patients of record of his practice and to the dentist in the locality that the associate is now there and is practicing there. There should be some provision for terminating the agreement if it just doesn't work. If the two find out that they're just not compatible, something like 60-day notice should be given before the agreement is terminated. This lets both parties get out from under in less than a year if it just simply isn't working. It should also point out whether or not the associate dentist is an employee or an independent contractor. And who's going to take care of emergencies when they arise, weekend emergencies, holiday emergencies, and that sort of thing.
What about the flow of patients? Should agreements have a comment included that indicates to the associate where the patients will come from? Will they be patients of record of the owner, or only new patients that come into practice, or only emergency patients?
I'm not so sure it's important to have that written in the agreement itself, but certainly the associate should have an understanding with the owner that the type of patient that he or she is going to treat, and it should say that the associate is going to have an opportunity to treat a cross-section of the patients that are attracted to that practice.
Since this agreement is really a guideline for compatibility between the owner and the dentist, what about financial arrangements? How do you feel about that. Should that be included in the agreement?
By all means, and I think that the prospective associate and the owner would agree that that's paramount.
We'd like to discuss these financial arrangements that are typical of an associate agreement after this management fact. Financial arrangements are certainly an important part of any agreement. Dr. Love, what about financial arrangements?
I think you can describe financial arrangements and these agreements as being typical because they vary all over the ballpark. You can have such things as the associate receiving a salary only, receiving a percentage of his production, a percentage of his gross receipts, or a combination of the two. He might have a situation where when he or she first begins to practice, that he or she will receive a draw against their gross receipts, and that merely means that the owner dentist is paying the associate monies that the owner dentist expects to collect later as a result of the treatment rendered by the associate, and that those monies would be charged against the associate's account until such time as the associate's percentage of the gross receipts sort of caught up. And this gives the associate a chance to have some income right away rather than waiting for the patient to pay the bill, which might be 30, 60 days down the road.
In essence, draw is really priming the pump then in terms of monies for the associate.
Sure, it gives them a chance to have some spending money to start with. As far as the percentages are concerned of gross receipts or gross production, those vary all over the lot too. You can have 50-50 where they split. The owner gets half of the receipts and the associate half. You can have 60-40 arrangements where the associate has 60% and the owner 40%, or vice versa, 40-60. There are some large group practices where it's a 30-70 split, where the associate receives only 30% of the gross receipts. I think that whether that percentage is fair to the associate depends to a large extent on the kind of practice and whether the associate's seeing a cross-section, or is the associate only going to be seeing those patients that are difficult to treat, or the child who is difficult to manage, etc. It should also point out whether or not the associate is responsible for any of the wages of the auxiliaries, and what happens with lab bills. Usually there's some sort of split there. The associate perhaps pays half of his lab bills and the owner pays half. Or suppose you had a situation where the associate wanted to do his lab work himself. Well, the agreement should point out what happens then. Is the owner going to pay then half of the going rate for whatever lab work the associate has done himself? And then too, the agreement should point out that the fee schedule has been established for the office by the owner dentist, and that those are the fees that the associate agrees to charge for his services.
Is it safe to assume that if the associate gets a smaller portion of the split, such as the 30% that you indicated in the one example, is it safe to assume that the owner dentist then would pay for lab fees and auxiliary salaries and provide those services to the associate?
Well, I think so. I think that that would be fair. The overhead of the owner dentist's office, of course, is a factor here. Oftentimes, if it's a 50-50 split, the associate is operating with a lower personal overhead than the owner dentist for whom he's working.
What about the situation that the associate really is successful and begins to accumulate a large amount of fees? Are there agreements whereby the split changes as the associate gains more income?
Yes, there are, and I think they're a good idea, because I think the associate should have that kind of incentive, you know, to continue to do well.
Earlier you mentioned the independent contractor, and I'd just like to touch on that briefly. In terms of taxes, in terms of employment security commission obligations, how does this work in terms of the associate dentist and the owner? Is an associate dentist an independent contractor or an employee?
Well, this is a very gray area, and our friends at Internal Revenue are the ones who really make that decision. It's important from the owner's point of view, because if the associate dentist is considered an employee, the owner has the responsibility to pay workman's compensation, unemployment insurance, half of the Social Security, and in the case of a professional corporation, that obligates the owner to put aside a percentage of the employee associate's income to pension plans and profit-sharing plans, etc. From the associate's point of view, how he's considered affects him from as to whether or not there's withholding from his salary, or does he pay his taxes on a quarterly basis. Social Security payment for him as an independent contractor is different than it is for him as an employee. But IRS tends to look at this whole gray area with certain criteria in mind. Does the owner dentist control the hours of the associate? Does he pay for vacations or sick days? Does he pay the associate a percentage of the associate's gross receipts? These are things that IRS would consider to delineate an employee.
It seems like that, in essence, it's more favorable for the associate to be considered an employee than an independent contractor.
I think so. On the other hand, IRS would consider the associate to be an independent contractor if the associate paid the owner a percentage of his gross receipts, and if he could come and go as he wished, and had no responsibility in the office other than treating the patients that he chose to treat when he chose to treat them. So really, most associations are employee-employer situations and not independent contractor situations.
Common question that arises: upon termination of an agreement, who owns the patients, the associate or the owner dentist?
Well, no one owns patients, Joe, as I'm sure you're very much aware. The only ethical, proper arrangement should be one in which it's the patient's choice as to which dentist they see. That's why I'm opposed to any covenant not to compete, a territorial limit as to where the associate can practice. I think that from an ethical point of view, the associate should be entitled to, if he wants to leave that practice, to open a practice next door if he wants to, or across the street, and he should be entitled to the records and the x-rays and all the help that he needs from the owner dentist in order to make that transfer as pleasant and easy for the patients as possible.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. William Love, our guest today on By Design, offering us an owner's point of view of associate practice. We hope you'll join us again for other programs in this series that are designed to help you plan and to implement a successful dental practice.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.